Alright, so this morning we're finishing off the violin and piano series with a piece by Japanese composer Yoshihiro Kanno. This piece is called Star Curve. He wrote it in 2010 and it's for violin, piano, and electronics. And I believe it uses Max MSP. I discovered this composer through this Google Sheet that I found. I can't remember where I found it. It might have been on Twitter or something. And it's just a list of works for piano and electronics by Japanese composers. And, slowly going through this list, I found a lot of pieces were inaccessible or you had to pay for them. And Kanno's music was change of pace because all of his scores are available for free on his website. So I just downloaded a bunch of them. And this is one of them. By his mid-20s, he'd already acquired a master's in composition and had won the Monaco Prince Pierre Prize for Composition. This was in 1979. And he has continued to garner awards since then. Currently, he is chairman of the Japan Composers Association, and he's professor emeritus at Waseda University. Now, he has pieces for Japanese traditional instruments and pieces for choir, chamber works, orchestral works, works for film and TV. He describes his music as being based on three pillars: Western instruments, traditional Japanese instruments, and electronic music. So I think the three mediums or cultural mediums he works in is kind of a fascinating way to describe oneself. Some of his commissioners include the National Theatre of Japan, Noriko Otake, Noriko Ogawa, and the Musa Kawasaki Symphony Hall. It's another commissioner of his music. Suntory Hall, and the Himeji City Museum of Art. So, pretty nice career. I would be pretty happy to have such a career. And as for his commercial work, I was fascinated to discover that he is the composer for the music to Angel's Egg, or Asuka's Egg. This is a experimental Japanese animated film from 1985. And I haven't watched this in years, but it's a very beautiful film. If you're interested, I'll include a link in the description because it seems to be available on the Internet Archive. As for the piece here, you notice that the title is in Chinese, but he put the instrumentation and his own name in Japanese here. So Star Curve might be not the best translation. I'm assuming it's something that's best expressed in traditional Chinese writing. Yeah, so the only electronic sounds that he notates are wine glass pitches, but the staff is there throughout the piece, and sometimes he'll just write Max MSP on the staff, which makes me think that there's some other electronic sounds which aren't accounted for visually in the score. The score itself is a little bit messy. I'm seeing a lot of collisions and a lot of just weird decisions, like to have 3 measure numbers on the left. But the parts are really neat looking, so I can't fault him for that. Probably the performers will just be using that score to coordinate things anyways. So, alright, so I'm going to have a listen here, If you're like me and this piece is new to you, hopefully we can have a positive experience here, and hopefully I'm introducing you to a new favorite composer. And as always, the recording I'll be listening to is linked in the video description. Nice. So I listened to this recording that's on Kanno's YouTube channel, and the piece is about 12 minutes long, so it's quite slow throughout, and I really liked the climax. It's suddenly, like, for the more than the first half of the piece, it was just like very sparse two-part writing, and then this really low rumbling in the piano. It's quite noisy and unexpected, and it just slowly builds up to this climax, which is so noisy that there's really nowhere to go from there, and the piece kind of just ends with this huge swath of sound in the resonating in the piano. It's very strange that the whole thing is in 6/8, but in some ways that makes it a little bit more approachable. A lot of modal stuff, like modes of limited transposition stuff, it really reminded me of Messiaen in that way. And the one thing I didn't like about this score is it didn't give me enough detail about the electronics. I really wanted to know how the electronics worked. There was these like wine glass sounds, which I was assuming were fixed, like there was some sort of pre-recorded audio, but the Maximus P stuff for the most part was like this granular delay, which was very sparkly and strange, and probably where the composer started to get the programmatic idea for the title. A really subtle but powerful way to use electronics. And I think that's one thing to think about when you're writing for a classical ensemble, basically, and electronics is like the ensemble itself can already do so much. You don't need to add that much. We've been listening to just this ensemble for the past 9 episodes, and it's capable of all kinds of sounds. So to add electronics to it, you don't actually have to add that much for it to totally expand the sound world of violin and piano, basically. Yeah, my thoughts on the series as a whole, I think because I had so few scores, there were some gaps in the literature for sure, and I was debating not doing it at all because it was only male composers. There were no women composers, but I needed something to fill the holidays, just over a week of content, and I think it fulfilled that job really well. I think the two sort of pillars of of this series were the Schnittke and the Ives, and then some of the more recent pieces were interesting as well. I think the Pairt was worth looking at. One thing was there's like a huge gap between the most recent piece, the Dies Infante, and the present day, so that's one big gap. There's also a huge gap in literature between the Schnittke violin sonata and the Ives. That's like a period of 60 years or something, or 50 years, where I didn't have any scores for this ensemble. I think even though pianists and violinists have a wealth of repertoire, they tend to always program the same pieces, do the same pieces on their juries. Everyone in the violin studio is playing the same piece, Try to mix it up a bit. Try to figure out what you like. Hopefully, the past century or so has more to offer than you think. In the new year, in 2025, we're going to be looking at chamber orchestra, and I have at least 20 scores. There's not going to be any gap in my uploads. But there will be a gap in my personal listening schedule